Hey people, beginning of the 7th week of lockdown, do go to that original, a lot of links in this. I'm not expecting you to copy them down or anything. What I have done is put what I'm about to say on our website in a post, so do go to that for the links and photographs. Okay, so the first thing is there is actually a lot of good stuff to read. A general thing on COVID-19 and climate change in the New Yorker. There's a very good, very cautious, very scientific piece by Damien Carrington in The Guardian, second one. An article by Tom Vanderbilt. I assume a lot of you are familiar with his work. For me, probably one of the best things I've read is by Michael Liebreich. He's a former TfL board member. He's a conservative. He's very much a businessman's businessman, works for Bloomberg, and he's got a lovely quote in this. I read it out. He's saying that everybody involved with how cities are about, that includes us, must promote active travel and micromobility, not as nice to have for sustainability or health reasons, but as a public priority in order to keep cities moving and to enable robust economic activity. That's the kind of thing I think we need to have behind us. Next one is a thread from Chris Kenyon, who you may know, might be on today. And he's saying that what happens can't be just bits and pieces. We need a good plan for how we reallocate road space. One by George Monbiot. And then there's an article by Heidi Alexander. I have to say her tone was very much, hey, what should we do now? You know, kind of asking people rather than acting as Deputy Mayor for Transport. But anyway, there's a nice quote from her, and you can refer back to that. We can't replace one public health crisis with another. Yeah. We can't have people returning to their cars. Okay, next thing is stuff for you to do. I presume you have actually used the Cycling UK online form to get in touch with your council. That's the first thing. New for this week, there is a map of what's happening in the UK done by Cycling UK. Do go to that and add on stuff of your own. And the rest of it is the form from Living Streets to use. Transport Action Network have got a lot of money coming in, but they need more. And then you can reply to the House of Commons Transport Committee. And don't forget to thank your local roads and traffic police when they're doing good stuff. Okay, now I haven't spent much time on what's happening abroad because we've seen it and we know there's a lot of good stuff. I just quote the mayor of Tirana, Albania, because it's, you know, it's the poorest country in Europe and they've made an effort. I mean, it's a couple of painted bike lanes, but, you know, they're making an effort. A very poor country, they can do it. Check on Mike Lydon and Danny Williams for updates. Okay, so let's look at what's happening in the UK. First of all, bad stuff. Clean air zones in Leeds, Birmingham, Manchester being put on the shelf, as well as the ULEZ, LES and congestion charge in London, and there are other problems of the same kind in Bristol. Okay, now good stuff. York's first pop-up bike lanes now signed. That's good. The key workers corridor going to the hospital in Leicester, that's been extended. Wirral, as a guy and there's an activist and a councillor trying really hard to get this King's Parade closed to cars, and they haven't been able to do it in the way they wanted to because some conservative councillors were making a fuss and it'll have to go out to a special consultation and blah, blah, blah. So it's big struggle involved. Nice photo of a pop-up floating in Scotland, I don't know where. Richmond has got a plan to, make things better. So have Lewisham, by the way, to filtered permeability and so on and so on. Hackney, I talked about last week, should have, or maybe I didn't talk about them enough, but anyway, on the left, you can see a nice pair of footway extensions. And on the right, you've got bollards going into Broadway Market. Little question about, are they wide enough for cargo bikes? But anyway, that's a minor point. Okay. Also in the UK, Southwark, there's Footway extension. Tower Hamlets is closing off a section of a road near a park to stop rat running. And in Camden, this is a TfL road. The footway extensions you can see there in Camden High Street. Now, this is I think, London Borough of Camden in Kilburn High Road. Sylvia, who's on here today, has took this photograph, and that's, doing the old social distancing by putting barriers in on the footway. We don't want to see that. We want to reclaim carriageway space. I mean, it could have been done by the frontages, I don't know, but it's actually London Borough of Camden. Okay, so that's stuff which has been happening. I've got a couple of more photographs, and there will be other things trickling through. That's the update from what had happened last week, which was in turn an update from the previous week when Mark Strong was doing his stuff in Brighton. Okay, now, been a lot of announcements. Let's look at the announcements. Prime Minister's, this is when he was to a set of mayors, according to the Mayor of North Tyne, he was talking about taking the opportunity to push clean, green, active travel, cycling infrastructure, and getting cars off the road. That's the Prime Minister telling local authorities what to do, but obviously, as you know, they don't have money. So we're waiting on an announcement from the Minister, Grant Shapps. It was supposed to happen yesterday. It's been delayed until later in the week. And there's a quote from Sadiq Khan here. Quieter roads and fewer jet planes have made for a more pleasant environment. Londoners will rightly demand neighbourhoods that permanently work for walking and cycling, and a renewed drive to address the climate emergency. So that's a quote to hold him on to. The big quote is from Will Norman, and there's a big new hashtag you can look at, Street Space London. This is the Street Space Plan. And on May the 1st, he said the following. I've put in some numbers here, which are my numbers. I'm going to read it all out, or read out this chunk. The Mayor and TfL are developing a street space plan to fast-track changes to enable millions more people to safely walk and cycle. We'll repurpose traffic lanes. Now, I'd rather he'd said general traffic lanes, but he's saying there's going to be repurposing of traffic lanes. And parking spaces, very important. Taking away parking spaces, loading bays, etc., is quite a bold move. The French in Paris have talked about taking away 70-odd% of car parking spaces as a long-term strategy. And if we can do that, that's good. For temporary cycle lanes, widen footways for safe social distancing. Yeah. Build a strategic cycle network. Well, that sounds good. Want to see what it is. Create new routes. Want to see what they are. Alter traffic lights to reduce crossing times. That's good. Restrict roads to buses and bikes. That's good. At certain times of the day, I'm not so wild about that. That's part of the Tottenham Court Road plans. It's always been seen as a bit of a iffy thing. But, you know, this is the bold thing. Waiting on detail, but that was what was put forward by May the 1st. I understand LCC, London Cycling Campaign, have been in discussions with TfL. Nothing specific as of about 2 hours ago to come out, but this is what we're looking at. So that's thanks to everybody who's been in touch. And I've been, it often seems like a full-time job to keep in touch, keep on top of everything that's happened. But that's it. Widening pavements impacts on safe cycling, though. I mean, all these things depend on how you do it. One of the things is if you have a cycle lane, should you be able to overtake while effectively distancing? And I would say yes. The other thing is that what's gone in at Herne Hill, Lambeth, doing borough-wide, is that by extending the footways, they've had quite a considerably narrow carriageway. And part of that is the signing, narrow lane, do not overtake cyclists. So that's something I'd be pretty keen on emphasizing when stuff comes through.
Possibly some news from Cambridge that gives an indication of what we might be able to expect from ministers. A week ago, I was on a meeting with our mayor of our combined authority, and he didn't seem so keen on supporting cycling. And yet on Monday, he's now supporting pop-up cycle lanes after a meeting with ministers in London. So and we're looking at a day and a half to turn around proposals for something. Don't know, it's all a bit vague, but something is definitely moving after that weekend. So for him to be asking for pop-up cycle lanes, I'm assuming there's money involved for that. I'll keep you updated.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, here we go, the perspective from disabled people who cycle. So I'm Isabelle Clement, for those who don't know me. I'm the director of Wheels for Wellbeing. We're a small charity in South London. We exist to ensure that disabled people realise they can cycle and to ensure that everybody else realises that disabled people do cycle. So I'm just really going to talk briefly about where we're heading potentially. It could be bad for disabled people as we come out of the lockdown. But I think we can all work to ensure that that doesn't happen. So sorry for the slightly overdramatic title to my presentation. So just a very brief recap of where we've just been, or where we are for as far as disabled people in this lockdown situation. There's been some good, some bad, and some very ugly stuff going on. So in the good, I made a bigger font for the good because there isn't as much as the bad. But three things that struck me really in terms of being good. The world has discovered flexible working and tech and home working. Now, for a lot of disabled people, that's been something that disabled people have wanted to do in order to work and participate in society, and it's been very much resisted. And suddenly, it's the thing of the moment. So that's a good thing for disabled people, for a lot of disabled people, particularly those who are in work. Mutual aid groups have sprung out, communities have rallied around supporting people who are shielding and self-isolating. I think that's been amazing, and a lot of good has come out of that. I don't know how long that's going to last for once the lockdown is off, but actually that's shown a very lovely side of society, and long may it last. Non-disabled people have realised they've had a taste of disabled people's daily reality. I've put that in the good, I'm afraid, because everybody's suddenly realised that having limited choices of places to go, things to do, can be a thing. Now, disabled people are really used to that. Lockdown actually hasn't been that hard to get used to for a lot of us, because lockdown often happens as far as health and other reasons. But will the non-disabled society remember what it felt like not to have as many choices and become advocates for an inclusive society? That's my hope. So that's in the good. The bad and the ugly, I'm going to go really quickly. It's very disappointing and very depressing, but it's because this has been a huge emergency. So there's been rushed new processes and facilities that have popped up, but they've been done without thinking, without asking disabled people. So we've had lots of information, but completely inaccessible to a lot of disabled people. We've had discriminatory measures in supermarkets, for example. You can't go with your personal assistant, or it's only one person at a time. Well, it's understandable, but for some disabled people, that means you're not allowed to shop. There's been no access to PPE for home carers, so people have been put at risk. There's been huge amounts of assumptions about the quality of your life and whether therefore you should be getting treatment. Some local authority duties have been relaxed by government, so our community care acts, etc. I'm not going to bore you with it. There's been therefore huge increased risk of ill health for disabled people, stigmatisation, disability, hate crime, and death have resulted. Disabled people have once again been seen and labelled as the vulnerable, have been put out of sight for their own good, but also out of mind, and they've been shielding. But the problem is now, as we start to consider coming out of lockdown, how long are disabled people going to be asked to shield in order that the rest of society gets back to normal? So this is really what this is all about. What do we need to think about as we unlock and as we start looking at our public environment? We need, in my mind, to think about disabled people. Now, in the meantime, whilst in lockdown, disabled people haven't been without cycling, some of us. So you've got here a picture of Natalie and her mum Sue. They borrowed one of our cycles. That's Natalie's favourite trike. She normally rides it at Croydon Arena during our session. She's actually been freer to cycle every day, and whenever she's wanted, because she's had the trike all to herself in Shirley, in South Croydon. Nice, lovely, very empty pavements and roads. She's been able to cycle as much as she's wanted. So actually that's been good for Sue, for Natalie. This is Scarlett. She's an orthopedic surgeon. She's also a disabled person. And she's kept the effects of her bone marrow cancer at bay by cycling her e-bike every day. She's an NHS key worker. As it is at the moment, we've become more aware of her because she's suddenly popped up as being happy to fundraise for us as part of the 2.6 challenge that we put out. But she's cycling every day, and she is able to keep at bay her medical condition. She's also an orthopedic surgeon, just by the by. And my third example, in the meantime, during this lockdown, Rick, the coolest person you can meet, creator of Paracheer, first world champion in Paracheer, has been also cycling every day with his partner. He should have been in Orlando at the World Championship for cheerleading. Instead, he's shielding in Bromley, and he's borrowed one of our hand cycles, and therefore his cycling has increased, not decreased. But what happens now that the lockdown gets unlocked and the roads go back to what we potentially fear? So we're asking, we have a number of asks, basically, in order to ensure that disabled people do not get way more disabled by the environment that we're about to start seeing pop about around our streets during the remainder of this health emergency. So we've got some asks for local authorities, for example. We think that they need to facilitate safe walking and cycling by all, not assume that disabled people, older people, everyone who is supposedly vulnerable is going to stay shielding, because we can't all stay shielding and it's going to kill us if we do. So we need local authorities to prioritise those who are most at risk, not vulnerable, but at risk in allocation of public space. So we want disabled people, older people, children to be thought about from the beginning of the planning of our pop-up infrastructure. So when thinking about setting out our new temporary schemes, we want disabled people, older people and children to be thought of at the start. We need equality impact assessments to be done, and make sure that even in temporary schemes, we use the principles of inclusive design. We need to involve, we want local authorities to involve their local disability organisations. There's a lot of knowledge. I mean, we have niche specialist knowledge in cycling and disability, but there's plenty of disabled people in every local authority who can make sure that they check and they advise people who are designing temporary things. And temporary things are great because you can change them if you make a mistake. We want local authorities to start looking at ensuring that there are e-cycle and adaptive cycle training and hire centres in all borough councils, because it's all very well us in South London, Wheels for Wellbeing, lending some of its cycles during the lockdown, but actually we need many, many more of the people who are not cycling currently to access cycling solutions. That includes disabled people, but plenty of other who are not officially disabled do not cycle, and they need e-cycles. We need a lot more of those to be able to be trialed, trained on, hired, etc. So that's what we want local authorities to be ensuring happens. Yes, they'll need some money for that. From central government, well, other than give lots of money to local authorities to do all this, we want them to, like a lot of you will want to see the publication of the new cycle design guidance, which has been awaited for far too long, and which, if it includes everything that's been suggested, it will ensure much more equal and much more accessible cycling design. So we want to see these published ASAP. We want to see e-cycles and adaptive cycles, cargo cycles, etc. We want those subsidised. We want subsidised schemes for not just through the Cycle to Work scheme, which of course exists and can subsidise these, but for the general population, not just for the few. In our case, in disabled people's case, there's far too many people who are out of work who would like to be cycling for their health and for everything else, for transport, and who cannot access the Cycling to Work scheme. So we want more subsidies. We want cycles to be recognised as mobility aids, so that whether people are cycling on the road or whether they are using a little bit of footway to get to the end of their destination, we want them to be allowed to carry on using their cycle when it's a mobility aid. And we really want to ask for a national public education campaign about the fact that cycling and walking are the most responsible choices in this current health crisis and obviously climate crisis. And we really think that that needs to be a government backed campaign. And also we want them to talk about and to push to make clear the expectation, just like we have expected people to lock themselves away for during the lockdown, and the whole population, we now need the whole population to understand that priority in public spaces needs to be given to the people most at risk. And let's stop talking about people who are vulnerable. We need to talk about people who are most at risk, and what other people need to do around them in order to not put them at further risk than they are from the virus and other things. That's me. Thank you very much.
Can I just echo one of the things Isabelle said about the use of the word vulnerable? And I've actually spent a number of years saying why I don't like the term vulnerable road user. I think it can be sort of very patronising and not enabling, and that instead we should, I mean, John Parkins talked about that as well, and that you can talk about dangerous road users or dangerous modes, rather than making it look like because you're walking and cycling, you're some kind of sort of outgroup of people who need to be cotton wooled or something like that.
I've got one. I'll put it in the chat box as well, which is I thought it was a really, really good presentation, Isabelle, and lovely to see you. I just wonder whether involving local disability access organisations in local designs could be a bit of a double-edged sword. While there are many disability access organisations now that are as progressive and inclusive and brilliant as Wheels for Wellbeing are, there are also those for whom, you know, wider pavements might well be good, but cycle tracks will be viewed of, you know, as the devil's work itself.
Simon, your point about the involvement of disability groups being a bit of a double-edged sword, I couldn't agree more. On the other hand, I think we need to engage. We need to engage with each other. We have similar needs in terms of being the so-called vulnerable road users, as in road users at risk. We need to listen to each other, and we need to help each other to get better conditions out there on the streets. And I think we'll find that, you know, we're pushing, or you'll find that you're pushing at an open door. Yes, there are some entrenched parts of the disability sector, a few individuals, a few organisations who have been fighting a good fight for a little while around specific topics like bus stop bypasses, etc. We will not solve it if we do not talk to each other and if we do not build a consensus. So I think we can't do without, because if we do without the conversation and the working together and working it out and coming back to local authority together with you know, shared solutions, however hard they are to find, we will continue to be to allow this whole issue, this whole sort of thorny issue, to divide and to therefore let the car lobby win. So I really, really strongly believe, I mean, we will take this as it is going to be a big area of our campaigning now. We've been very happily and will continue campaigning with you guys, the cycling lobby, and we will also turn the other way and start working more with the disability lobby because we need to inform and shape their narrative, our disability narrative around active travel. So that's, if we last long enough to continue to do that, that is my next big mission, is to grow that voice within the disability sector, the disabled people for active travel, which has not been a huge voice because there are a set of priorities, and there are even more important priorities for the disability sector, which are more life and death. But active travel is becoming much more of an issue, and disabled people want clean air just like everybody else. I will come back also about well, no, I wanted to say something alongside this about blue badge parking. We cannot go out there and assume that it will be okay to take away all car parking. We need to ensure that some parking and some car access is available for disabled people. Again, otherwise we will shut that dialogue away. Some disabled people are nowhere near equipped, nor do they have the energy to be able to either cycle or walk any distance at all. Many could cycle, we're well placed to know that, but if they're not equipped currently and they are currently reliant on the car, they need to be able to get to their destination, to their homes and to the shops. So a small amount but of well-placed and prioritised blue badge parking, we will continue to advocate for and not against. So it's part of properly designing our pop-ups that we do not take away key bits of blue badge parking, or we work with disability organisation to find a way of replacing them somewhere else, or replacing them by something else, but we need to not take them away. We're also pushing for a blue badge scheme for disabled people who cycle, because currently many disabled people who try and cycle are disadvantaged. They would be in a better position if they were to drive than they are if they cycle, in order to be able to park at their destination. So we're working on that, but we haven't won that battle yet. And just to let you know that in terms of, yes, we are very much waiting for that new guidance from government. We're also working with, I don't think it's a secret, we're working with Southwark Council currently to develop something which is currently called the Southwark score, but it will be called something else eventually, which is a score of inclusive inclusivity and accessibility of cycling infrastructure. And that, to my mind, is going to be extremely important. I'm not going to be assuming that pop-up infrastructure is going to be perfect to the millimeter in terms of camber and all of that. It is pop-up, that's fair enough, but in terms of having the broad elements of what makes infrastructure accessible or not, and not missing some huge area. So we're refining it with Southwark as we speak, and eventually it will be made generally available. So look out for that. And then just finally, there was a picture that came in one of the presentations before me, which was, I think, of either Southwark or Lambeth. I'm talking with Lambeth tomorrow, but some of those pop-up lanes are way too narrow, and some of those ramps that have been put down, it's great they're there, they're not in the right places, and there is no space for people to safely get down onto that temporary infrastructure. So much work to be done. I really want, I don't think he's here, I want Michael Barrett to get involved in all this, because he's done that work with constructors and who constantly put up temporary infrastructure, and he's really got it nailed in terms of what makes good temporary cycling infrastructure. So we must get him on board, and his temporary roadworks guidance for TfL needs to be out there big time.
Yeah, so basically when the government stops up lots of money to actually help us address the crisis and help us come out of lockdown in a kind of sensible way by tying some space off now for people walking and cycling now. Well, we kind of want to know what options. So it's really a little bit of a list to think about. The ranging from the you could just do it to like, okay, give this a little bit more thought. Now, most of these options that I'm going to show we've talked about over the last few weeks now, but I always think it's handy to have a bit of a list. Okay, so I'm going to show a few things. I tweeted this out the other week just to say, like, look, you can do this stuff for nothing, like the physical distance. And really to kind of appease some councillors who thought, oh my God, we're going to have to pull out loads of parking, we're going to have to rearrange everything. This is certainly, we've got a lot of these streets up in the northwest, so and I wanted to show something by a hospital that retained the parking, putting some flexible posts and a white line, mandatory cycle lane. It's also the same line marking as a bus lane. That stuff could go in right now. The local authority wanted to do it, they go out and put that marking in. That line marking is the order itself, so there's no consultation required. It's just a question of putting it out there, and the marking becomes the order in there. And in the way I've shown it there, there's no parking removal. You're just taking away one of the lanes there and just sort out the junction. No real problem. So the idea with people walking along, they could walk along the footway, right, someone's coming the other way, and rather than stepping into live traffic on a busy road, we've cordoned off some space. They're really just mixing in a space that cyclists would be, or the people walking in there. So they get an option of going either way around the car. For cyclists coming along there, you basically got a nice big wide lane to ride down there. Some people were worried about the dooring of this kind of approach in there, but that's 2.5 meters past that car in there, and you could have taken the entire lane. I just wanted to show that it could go in with existing line markings. Also with paint marking these days, that could go in and just wash itself off in 6 weeks when we're all out the other end. So these sort of things can go in there. I've suggested in this drawing, in this context, flexible posts that kind of screw in there so they don't get knocked around by cars or shifted in there. For me, that's sensible. I'm told by the suppliers that they have lots of these ready to go in there. So for me, that's like you can just do it and it could be massively effective and you don't have to ask anybody, and it could be a real win in there. So that's the kind of sort of thing you could think about. Let's go a few more. Showing a deliberately rough scheme here, but like it's a massive achievement in Manchester, this one, that they actually stopped cars from parking on the footway, albeit yes, it's not the nicest looking footway, and there are lots of issues that we need to sort out there. And you know, when we all don't want to see bollards, but hey Londoners, that is what success looks like in Greater Manchester. And there it means you can actually walk down a footway, or you know, ride down it, or take your wheelchair down it. There's some kind of option there, and the fact that people are looking at this and going, well, how are people supposed to socially distance or physically distance if there's cars everywhere. And particularly on a bend like that, with the guardrail, there's still more to do in there, but we've got something. The suspension of parking bays, and that sort of thing, again, you can just do. They're not supposed to be parked on a footway. You can do that right now. Get cracking. The next one, suspending parking bays to provide some extra social distance space, physical distance. I always keep saying that one in there. We talked about the orders, whether it's a temporary traffic order. I say as like for most of the people on this webinar are either campaigners or they know councillors or you're quite high up in there. You don't have to worry about it. The absolute bread and butter of councils is to do traffic orders in there. So it's more about making the decision to find that space and going through the right process. It was good in Lambeth that they passed that borough-wide order, which meant it could shave a week off the time for actually doing these things. Anyway, good to have. Calming in neighbourhoods. I really like this one in Manchester, that someone put in one of those implied zebras that we've been kind of talking about there. Like, kids know that it works. We know that it works. It could be something as simple as this, that like you allow people to do this kind of thing to let people know. And you can see the Manchester issue there of the pavement parking. We're having to walk down the roads. I know I'm saying this from London, but I'm empathising with my northern colleagues there. This sort of thing, the kind of hearts and minds stuff can really go out there. Obviously, we could put filters in there to calm our neighbourhood streets. And I've been recommending to people when they are doing filters to maybe not put a massive block of concrete in there just in case an ambulance or fire truck's going down there. Let's have like a water-filled barrier, sand-filled barrier, something that they can push out of the way. The big vehicles that can get through there, but we still need to make those changes now. Talk about a few more. Yeah, decluttering. Again, obvious stuff, but now we've really got an incentive to do it. There's just one I took off the internet there. Clearly those A-boards are channeling people in there. There's bins that maybe doesn't need to be there either. Maybe an old phone box. Could we finally get rid of some of our defunct phone boxes in there? It could be that there's a whole string of signs for when different orders were there. There's all sorts of clutter on the streets in there. Now is a really good time, I think, to start clearing it out to enable people to distance from each other. So again, don't need to ask. Just maybe a few quid to help people do it would be good. Another old classic, but like a never more relevant than now, removal of guard railing. I know we fought for years in London, and my consultancy that I was with at the time did like the first case for getting rid of guardrail and did it on TfL's behalf in there. I swore by it, but as I'm working around the rest of the country these days, the case still needs to be made. Everybody still loves guardrail, and one of the first visualizations we did in Manchester, they put guardrail on it. I was like, what are you people on? How can you put guardrail in a visualization? But anyway, the main issue with guardrail at the moment, obviously, is that you can't step in the road and you can't distance in there. And this example here is taking a lot of used footway space out there that doesn't necessarily have to in there. So let's get after that stuff. Yeah, like something from our French cousins there, like they have like an order they can put on the road that's basically like a pedestrian priority, so you can actually walk in the carriageway with priority. We don't have that order here, but we can certainly mimic their style. This is like a visualization from Paris in there. So the whole like tactical urbanism stuff that Sustrans were talking about the other week, it's got to be done. Put some benches out there. For me, if a car was going down that street, which they are still entitled to, they'd be doing it very slowly. If someone was walking, they could feel that they could walk with their kids down the middle of the road. And we've got to be looking at creative ways to make people feel safe, that they can go into the middle of the road, and also make drivers aware that people will be walking in the middle of the road. I certainly have that issue near me when it's asphalt and narrow footways, and you have to step in the road, and then the other person wants to step in the road, and there's a jogger there and a fast-moving car, and you're all trying to communicate. If we create environments like this, it should make it a little bit easier. Okay, a few more, because I want to open up for questions. And temporary crossings, as people are moving around in better numbers in there, and they might all want to go. You might have a busy road, and it might be 400 metres between each crossing in there, which means everybody's heading for those same points. A couple of extra crossings every 150 metres, 200 metres along that could relieve the strain at certain points in there. We have this equipment, it's out there, people could utilise it to get some new crossings in for pedestrians and break up the streets somewhat. All right, let's keep going. Reducing speeding. We could look at temporary speed limits. That could be done. Again, it's a fairly long-winded process, but there's nothing stopping you trying to win hearts and minds in there. And I particularly like this sign that someone put up on Twitter, and for me, that makes it very clear to drivers. There's people out there. There's different functions going on, particularly if we tie it in with some of the other things that I'm talking about. This could be a way to go. All right, what else have we got? Yeah, all those cycle lanes that we've got out there. I mean, I've been banging on about this for years to upgrade them, but maybe now's the time, because people might need to walk in them as well, or ride them, and we need those extended footways in there. Here's one from New Zealand, particularly good that they've widened the cycle lane, and they put some cones inside it as well on what was the old one. Now, obviously, we can cone, we can do flexi post, something to actually protect that space so people feel confident to step in it, and it'll actually be there for when cyclists need it as well. So we've got thousands of kilometre mandatory cycle lanes out there, and I'd rather be in a protected one. I'm sure someone who's walking to into the carriageway would prefer it was protected rather than just a solid white line. And again, you can upgrade your advisory cycle lanes to mandatory now as well, no consultation required. Someone's already mentioned this one, and someone said it in the chat as well. We've got information signs. Let's get the right ones out there. And these are particularly popular in London. I've been trying to get people around the rest of the country to use them as well. The narrow lanes do not overtake cyclists in there. It's almost like you're creating a cycle street with that kind of ruling. Now, drivers interpret these kind of information signs as orders. So let's go with that. Let's see if we can make a more pleasant, slow street environment in there. So again, ordering some signs, getting them on the street can really help out in areas that you're feeling some issues with. So another one to add to the list. Just talk about the absolute classic. As people are starting to go back to work, ideally, because people can't use public transport, we don't really want them getting into the cars. We've been saying this every week, and in order for them to start using bikes, we're going to need some extra cycle parking. There's a logistic headache that's coming our way, and there's lots of temporary solutions like this. I've shown one of the cycle hoop car-shaped stands there. Take out one car parking space, see the other options. You can get in lots of bikes in there. We can start thinking about providing for people in there. Because ideally, people who are going back to work would be the ones that are riding or can walk to work. That's certainly the case with some of the employees that I've been speaking to in there. But just a few ideas, really, to kind of summarise what we've been talking about the last few weeks. And also would like to give you a few options of what we can ask for. There's some real standard stuff that can just be done. And hopefully, if the government can come up with some money to help do this stuff, we can start rolling these things out there, because en masse, all these little things add up to I think a good change and a good address of the emergency situation in there.
Round Hampstead, someone here might know, but round Hampstead, there are areas where roads, people who walk, cycle or ride horses have priority, and they've got a name, and I can't remember what it is, but the maximum speed, I think, is 10 miles an hour. It goes around the side of Hampstead Heath. I did a Tom Bogdanovich bike ride around there once. We do need a lot more of those, especially in residential areas. But I'm sure there must be an official way of doing it.
I think that's probably a private road where you can just kind of put whatever kind of signs you want up, but there's nothing stopping us putting information signs up that kind of mimic that approach. People are a little bit reluctant on public highways to use signs that aren't prescribed. But we have got some interesting information ones out there, and there's nothing stopping you put a poster up or do what you want as a local authority to get the desired effect. So I agree with you, we can roll out that situation. It's just a question of being creative, I think.
I think, is that a quiet lane that Ruth's talking about? There is a sign for it.
Brian, can I ask a question or bring up an issue? Hi, thanks. Sorry, Brian's employers were keeping me earlier, so I was on a work call. One of the issues that hasn't really been discussed, I mean, this is obviously, understandably, quite London focused, but outside London, there are lots of councils where there are two-tier authorities. So there's a county council and a district council. And I've been talking to a unnamed council in the south of England, I won't name them, who basically would like to do lots of stuff as a district council, but their county council, who are the highway authority, is very reluctant. The county councillors, it's Labour Tory, which is not unusual in such situations. I can hear Cambridge probably thinking, yes, that's us, but it isn't Cambridge. And the county council essentially saying we can't give priority to one form of transport over another, which is obviously something they've been doing all the time anyway. and they're waiting to hear from the minister to get a steer. And that's a real, I think that's a real issue, because that you've got an urban rural split, you've got political issues, all those levels of not wanting to do things. The problems are in the urban areas, not the rural areas, and it's the rural areas that tend to have the political power in those locations. And there's no answer to that except to say that something that hasn't really been thought of.
Excellent. Caroline, did you want to come in and clarify about the quiet lanes? Or I think
I was just saying that there is in the traffic signs manual, there is a sign for quiet lanes, and I think they have the priority that Ruth was talking about.
Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that one. It's a bit of a raw one. Is it? I think Felicity had a question. Do you want to come in?
Hi, yep. Thank you very much. It's Fizz down in Poole. Can you just clarify about the speed limits and what we can do there? Are we able to make, for example, Poole, Bournemouth and Christchurch 20 miles an hour?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this one. Speed limits. Yeah, I mean, Bob talked about it all in week 1 as well of what we could do. Yeah, you can pass an order to reduce the speed of the road, and it would be a good time to start thinking about doing that. Sensible, and it'd last. I was debating whether you could use temporary traffic orders, but I think it's it's a different order to get the speeds in there. But it might well be that we can get a similar, if not greater, effect by just getting the right messaging out on the streets now, which is why I showed that kind of sign in there with the kind of rainbow and the slow streets. And there might be more kind of tactical urbanism style ways that would psychologically slow the road down in combination that will get you a slightly better effect than a speed limit fix across the city, which might, the other ways of going about it that I've been advising as well is getting the police to take it seriously, and they really have been in some places in there. It's back on the agenda. Say if someone's doing more than 20 miles an hour in a residential area, they should be pulled over. Where are you going? Why is it so fast? There's kids in the middle of the road. There's people trying to distance in there. So it might be that there's a kind of enforcement angle to it as well, which is all get us away from going through the full order process. So I'd say look at all the options and look at it in a round with what you're doing and where you've got the issues in there, rather than just being blanket. But if someone did want to use this opportunity to say, okay, our whole urban area's 20 miles an hour in there, then that would be a really interesting process to go through. But I think probably it'd be easier to look at local situations in there and see where have you got a speeding issue, where can you do some kind of a more tactical urbanism approach. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that one in there, but
yeah,
sometimes
I was
can I
either of Andy Mayo or Andy Mayo or Andy Salcold, whether they know what would be the easiest way to do a kind of temporary limit, whether, because obviously we have temporary speed limits through roadworks at times. So I don't know if there is a way to sort of get around the TTRO, which is quite a long-winded process to go through.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
And then we'll see one of the Andys want to reply. Bob, yeah.
Yeah. Can I say about this? Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff in social media about it. And what's interesting is that lots of people are complaining about the bad driving which has happened because of lower levels of congestion intensity, and which was entirely predictable. Actually, lots of ordinary people don't like this happening, and they'd like to see a lot more policing. So you take, for example, there was a tweet from Sharon Davis. I don't know if you remember her. She was an Olympic swimming person, saying, I was out on my bike and people are driving badly. It's dreadful. And those kind of so-called, not just us campaigners and green people and traffic people, we need to link in with that. And, one of the issues, if you're talking about this, is that there's a whole long argument between people like the 2020 people who just want to have the limit and just do that, and others who are saying, well, hang on, we need to be doing more in terms of actually making sure it's complied with through engineering or whatever. And I think this is a good thing to just say, we really want traffic policing. We really want this to happen now. And, you know, a lot of people already have 20-mile-an-hour limits, which are flouted. So, you know, let's talk. I would personally urge that you go for the enforcement of the existing limits first, particularly if you already do have 20-mile-an-hour ones. So, you know, that's my suggestions.
Do one of our expert Andys want to come in and I'll answer Adrian's challenge?
I'll have a go, Brian. Yeah, it's Andy Mayo.
Thanks, Andy.
In terms of the order making process, there isn't really any shortcuts. You could look at a experimental order, gives you a little bit more flexibility, but the process is essentially the same as a temporary order. It can be done quite quickly, but you need the local authority resources to do it, and it's always a bit of a pain to do, really. I like the idea of signing, Brian, that you mentioned. Really, there's nothing really to stop local authorities putting in information signs up, making them look not like traffic signs is one option, and also the other one with the yellow signs. People do believe that they're mandatory, even though they're not. But there's nothing to stop you putting them up anywhere, really, and giving whatever message you want. So. No real shortcuts, but a couple of good suggestions that you gave earlier, I think.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I just want to make the kind of engineering case that you've got like speed limits and you've got like design speed, and you could say to an engineer, make this street a design speed of 15 miles an hour, and then we'll put stuff all over it and paint stuff and drop obstructions all over the place, and then that will be a 50-mile-an-hour street. You take a 40 and change its limit to a 30, it's like, what will you really notice the difference? So for me, there's an element of design, and there's quick, cheap, and effective design stuff in there, and signs we can use to get the same effect. So that might be something worth thinking about rather than get into a big legal debate. Has anybody else got any comments or questions?
Can I ask something quickly?
Please do.
Again, yeah, just on, welcome your advice, Brian, and other people on, I know some boroughs are looking at these pop-up cycling measures, and someone here, I think Roger Stocker's just mentioned the issue of when you've got protected infrastructure that you're putting in, and then you get to a pinch point, so you've got a refuge or traffic signals or something, which really, you know, you might have them at quite regular intervals along a road. Bus stops, I think, obviously you could probably just stop the cycling infrastructure, but what would your advice be? Because I know this is an issue for boroughs.
What, on putting crossings in?
Sorry, no, on having a continuous stretch of wands or coning, for example, as you're going along a route on a main road. What do you do at a pinch point when you've got a refuge?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Whether you'd like to, well, one, you wouldn't be putting them in if that pinch point meant that people would be driving over whatever physical, like flexible posts you're putting in there. So we'd have to look at that. I mean, there's extreme ways that we do during like the marathon and stuff, where you can kind of ramp up over curbs during the event in there, so cars can effectively go over the post. And that I'd give brownie points to anybody doing that in there. But it could well be that there's some bits where you can't put the physical protection in there, but like 90% of it is covered. And although I wouldn't say this way if I was designing a new scheme in there, we're still, if you've got a street that's 90% like wide enough to enable physical distancing, but it's 10% where it's narrow, at least people can time when they're going towards that bit and look around, and it's a slower speed environment in there. The question is to try and do stuff in there, and like if there's a bit where it's not perfect, make sure it's kind of safe, or at least people are warned in there. But by all means, give it a go, and let's try and get as much space to enable people to physical distance as possible.
Yeah, okay, my question is, it's Eddie Taylor here. I'm from the Merseyside Cycling Campaign. And as you probably know, Merseyside is a very car-centric place. And so we are seeing this as an opportunity to try and, like everywhere I guess, is to try and get these temporary measures in place, which hopefully will then be trial measures and then be shown to work. And we have the opportunity of actually speaking to the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority in the next couple of weeks. We're trying to arrange a Zoom call with Liam Robinson, she's the is in charge of transport of the city region. And it's where Liverpool is at the moment, the city region, they've got the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. They've got that, and that was done for them by Mersey Travel. We weren't particularly happy with the way it was done. We're not particularly happy with how it is. There doesn't seem to be much about walking in it. It seems to be a bit vague. But I think what we want to do is what we're trying to work out is what are we going to say when we actually get a chance to speak to them, because there seem to be so many things. Obviously, it's a large place, Merseyside. It's 1.5 million people. We can't be giving them just spoon feeding them every single road that they need to be doing. But sometimes it feels like that in Merseyside, that you're having to do that because there's a definite reluctance to do anything. Or there has been. That I think there's a balance is maybe shifting politically, but there does seem to be a lot of resistance in various authorities to actually doing anything. So really, just really advice really about what would you think our approach should be? I mean, should we be saying to them things like prioritize hospitals and schools first and the air and the roads around them, or should we be looking at the major routes? I mean, I'm partly thinking that maybe it's best if we try and do routes which are not in the cycling walking infrastructure program, because that way they'll be additional to it. Because if we just say the same routes, then it'll just be the same routes. We won't be getting anything extra out of this. So I don't know really. That's kind of, we're just really not sure what to say at the moment to them, and I was wondering if you had any views.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'd kind of listed 12 things that I felt you could ask for, but that's the easy bit, coming up with the options. It's where to do them and as who. So like we had a discussion the other week, and maybe it wasn't this one, but I was speaking to the campaigners in Manchester, and they were saying what we really need is specific locations and evidence to show to local authorities that this is why we need something here. So like a really tight footway where people are waiting outside a pharmacy and they go, look, something needs to be done there. And then like local authorities are in the kind of emergency mode, they'll feel they have to do something about that. So I suggested that to the walking and cycling campaigners of Manchester. Also, they were talking to like various WhatsApp groups from each individual street in there that had their own issues in there. And we were talking about ways of collecting that information, whether it's through like a commonplace or some kind of a GIS mapping. So people go, we've got an issue on our street, it's this, and then it's a question of local authorities go, okay, what can we do? Is this just a declutter thing? Do we actually need to provide some space in there? So I think to an extent, you don't have to worry too much about the solutions. I've given you 12 there anyway to think about in there. They're saying, this is the issue, what are you going to do about it? And, we could recommend stuff and we can help you, but like it's trying to be specific with the locations and the issue, I think would be there. And so if you turn up for that Zoom meeting and you've got a PowerPoint with 40 issues all raised by local community people in there, then there'll be a strong incentive on the authorities to do something about it. That's what I'd strongly recommend.
I just,
please. Yeah.
I was going to chime in a couple of things here. Eddie, look, I think it's a really interesting dynamic developing in Liverpool between Steve Rotherham, who's clearly saying he wants to do stuff around active travel, and then a bit of a battle with Anderson in the city centre, who just sees the city centre as a shopping area that everyone should drive into. So I think you have got momentum with both Steve and with your transport lead there. Sorry, Joe Anderson versus Liam. I got them confused. But I'd just say a couple of things I think everyone should be clear about. I really think that when the dust settles on COVID-19, public finances are going to be in an extraordinary mess. You should not assume that any money for something that hasn't already started work in the ground is going to be there. So I wouldn't be too cute about looking for new projects. The real question is, how do you force people to move, or how do you get people to move forward with existing projects, but do them at 10% of the cost? So the good news is they have to work fast. So how do you bank the money by doing it much faster, much quicker? Emergency measures, plastic, paint, get on with it, all the stuff that Brian's outlined. Bank that money, and then you can talk about the next project. But I would not assume that anything that has not already started is about, frankly, the money's about to be taken off the table. So that would be just a couple. So the final thing we're about to see an 85% drop in bus capacity across the UK. So if you really want to focus on specific areas, anywhere where buses are being used widely in the city is going to be where there will be this astronomical jump in demand for car usage and walking and cycling, and they're going to come into conflict. So look at your bus routes.
Okay.
Can I react to that?
Hold on, Mark, because go on, I'll let Mark come in because I know there's a few people with their hands up. Go on, Mark, please add.
So Katie's on here from Brighton as well, and we've had a letter from the chief executive of the bus company, essentially saying, stop doing this because you're going to kill the buses. We're really, really worried about what you're doing, and please will you go away and stop trying to create any of these facilities, because there'll be no hope ever of revitalising the bus industry, and I want you to stop. Now, we haven't responded yet because it's quite political. He's a nice guy, and he's generally, as a bus person, not as bad as some of the others. On the other hand, Chris's points are absolutely valid, and it's going to be a very difficult one to balance. Brighton is either the most or the second highest level of bus use outside London in the country. Nottingham is the other one. So it's going to be a real issue, and particularly Labour politicians are particularly interested in that, not killing buses. So I think there's an issue there to be grappled with.
It certainly is. Simon, yes, I was just going to call you in.
Thank you. I was just going to say, fairly obviously in London we've got some fairly unique situations, but the reality is this isn't a scrap about buses in the sense that, as Chris said, bus usage for the foreseeable future until we have a vaccine is going to be massively lower. We can't stuff as many people onto buses, onto tubes, onto trains as we were doing. We're going to only be able to put on a fraction of the rush hour in terms of public transport. So the simple binary choice that every single council in the whole of the UK will face is what's going to happen as people start going back to work. Are they going to get in cars, or are they going to find other ways of getting around? Because the buses won't be available. So I think, Eddie, going back to your point, for me, what I'm saying to London leaders at the moment very strongly is, if you do not take action on this now and fast, you will face an absolute wave of cars coming your way. Today we tweeted a picture of the A40 this morning. The cars are back already in London. There's a massive queue leading up to the Blackwall Tunnel. So the cars are coming back fast. With it will come the pollution. And pollution exacerbates, we're pretty sure now, coronavirus, COVID-19, both spread and lethality. So I think you need to just say to every single councillor who's saying to you, these are 20 reasons why not to do stuff, or oh, it's all a bit difficult. Well, if you don't do anything, you're facing quite a dystopian future.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I kind of work for a Scouse guy quite a lot of time at the moment, and he's making some pretty good statements on this. So I'd look at some of the stuff that Chris Borden was saying, and I know Andy Burnham as well is from that neck of the woods, and Steve Rotherham and him are planning some big things together. So it's on everybody's radar what you want, Eddie, and I think I'd just say be specific about what you want in there. Even if that specific ask is, can we do the whole LC whip thing in there? Can we get stuff along these priority corridors? That can be a specific ask in there because it's evidenced by something. But for me, the stuff that really works is photos, videos, like specific locations. That's, I think, how we win. Does anybody else want to come in?
I was just going to say on that, just before you get, is the Cycling Commissioner, Simon O'Brien, has actually set up a Dropbox for people to post videos. So we are going to look at doing that. Yeah. Thanks everyone for their contributions. They're really useful.
Yeah, Simon's brilliant. And the good thing about him is he knows the whole network back to front as well. So you can be really specific with him. Yeah. Did someone else want to come in?
Yeah. Can I say something, Brian? Yeah. Just to back up the things about, the need to be hard-headed here, because we are facing this enormous battle. I mean, Clarkson, he's scum, so I normally don't mention him, but he's called for getting rid of bus lanes. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if there is pressure from motorists to say, look, these buses are going past with not many people. Why can't we use bus lanes? So that's the kind of battle that will have to be fought. And we're actually talking about, you know, getting safety for people cycling in London because it's all clogged up. So, you know, these are the kind of things we have to talk about. Chris Kenyon's comments about the fact that we're not going to have money, so we have to zoom ahead with temporary stuff at low cost. This is a real tough battle. And I think all the ideological stuff, you know, all the sort of bicycle bingo thing about you don't pay tax, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, that will have to be fought intensely over the coming weeks. You know, this is really going to be a very hard struggle.
Just want to come in on the buses. I didn't survive 4 years at TfL without loving buses. I just wanted to show that first image that I showed, like with the cycle lane. Cycle lane is the same as a bus lane in there. And we're saying to people, well, maybe this is a chance to get the space over, get 4.5, 5 meters of space over, and then you could basically roll it into your bus network at the end of the day, have a cycle lane inside a bus lane in there. So we don't necessarily have to be taking space from the buses. It could be laying out the justification for more space going over to bus priority going forward in there. Just at the moment, we won't have a huge amount of buses out there using it in there, but eventually coming out of this crisis, buses are still the main way that people get around in London in particular in there, and we don't want to lose that. We certainly don't want them coming over to the cars. So for me, buses are still the answer in terms of active travel. We've got half our walking trips related to people getting to public transport tubes and particular buses in there. So we definitely don't want to lose that. I think the space that we're tying over, they've certainly been trying to make this case in Greater Manchester in there where, you know, we're really going to go big on buses in the next few years in there. So, okay, we might have like up to 6 months where they're not applicable, but it doesn't mean that some of the space we tie over now can't eventually go to benefit buses. Just want to make that one. That's why I was going to have the TfL backdrop of the buses today, just to make that point. Anybody else want to come in? It's been an intense one, this one, isn't it?
Can I come in, Brian?
Oh, of course.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to sort of build a bit on what Chris Kenyon was just saying. But in terms of making the case for these measures, the thing we all have to keep holding on to is that the virus crisis is an ongoing crisis. The need for physical distancing is with us for the foreseeable future. And our local authorities, our transport authorities, all have an imperative to enable social distancing or physical distancing. And that is the main point to get this stuff happening. It's not, all the good stuff about cleaner air, more physical activity or less physical inactivity, all of that good stuff, all obviously applies, but those are kind of additional benefits on top of supplying support for ongoing physical distancing. These, most local authorities are currently thinking, how are they going to cope when the second peak comes? So the case for physical distancing is very, very powerful, and really, if you want to make stuff happen locally, that is the strongest button to push.
Yeah, I've spent most of my career agreeing with Caroline, and I definitely agree with her again. Well, just so, yeah.
I spend all my time agreeing with you.
Roxanne, did you want to come back in?
Thanks, Brian. Actually, I think my two questions or points were actually answered perfectly by you and Caroline. Just being that I think we're going to start seeing pressure to turn bus lanes into bike lanes, or possibly even having more buses running at some time, because we can fit fewer people on each bus, so there might be more buses running. But I think positioning ourselves as supporting public transport, even if it's not happening right now, but we still see that as a solution, I think is so important. I think we just need to also remember back to the session last week and just keep coming back to that messaging, exactly what Caroline was saying. This isn't about us trying to get all the bike lanes we can get right now while we've got an opportunity. This is first and foremost absolutely about keeping people safe and then about keeping our communities resilient and running. And then it's actually about the infrastructure. The infrastructure is a means to the end right now, and we have to keep working together and remembering that, because otherwise people will just tune out and just think we're being opportunistic, which maybe we are, but actually my first concern is the people in my community. So let's not forget that.
With you all the way. Ruth, did you want to come in?
Very quickly, several things. We're ignoring the elephant in the room, which is a lot of companies will have less people going into work. So we will, especially, I know I'm a London person, but I'm sure other conurbations will have the same issue. I've thought for a very long time, Carol Crankshaw is on here and she knows that we fought desperately in Richmond to stop them removing the bus lanes by saying that, well, there's 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, therefore it'll be safer to cycle, and it absolutely isn't. Twickenham High Street is a death trap. But maybe we also need to go back to the idea of not the big double-decker buses anymore. When I first moved to London, we had the small hopper buses that took you from one place to another, and then maybe you had to change bus, which I know is an issue if you're disabled, but we do have hopper fares now, we have better buses, we hopefully will have a lot of people not travelling so far to go to work. So I know that's a long-term thing, but I think we have to stop thinking about the bus being the place that you do an hour-and-a-half journey on a big double-decker, which takes up so much space. Thank you.
Brian, this is Schultz down in Devon. Can I come in?
Of course you can. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Devon's, I guess, got 29 market and coastal towns, and obviously a lot of the conversations about London, but those market and coastal towns probably represent, replicated across the country, and a lot of them have got, multiple shop frontages, narrow pavements, parking and through traffic. And I think that the thing we haven't really spoken about and we need to put front and centre is that economic, the recovery for those local trading streets, and how we get that front and centre in the debate as well, and how we take those groups on board. Because as anyone who's tried to work on a shopping street for pedestrianisation schemes, they're very sceptical about some of these things, and we really need them to be front and centre in the debate. So if local authorities have got economy teams, they need to be pushing for this as well, and it needs to not just be transport planners trying to do and transport campaigners. It needs to pull in that economy side, and how this space is key for those shops that are going to have less customers. They're going to be really hurting when they reopen. So I think we need to be making sure that the trade associations, town councils are involved in this discussion too.
Briefly, just another one on the terminology. We really try and push for talking about mobility lanes rather than cycle lanes, which again is a way of uniting more people behind the concept. So you've got anybody who wants to move fast on any kind of wheels has a wider bit, and then the rest of the footways for the people who are slower, younger, older, whatever. But actually a lot of people could be moving faster, particularly if they've got wheelchairs, mobility scooters, or any other micro mobilities as well as cycles. So that's mobility lanes rather than cycle lanes. And I guess the only, just a plea really to make sure that we know there's not going to be a lot of money, but whatever we do, we need to make it we need to put it out there in an accessible way, so that we don't endanger and lock out older people, disabled people, young parents with buggies, etc., for months and months out of our economy. They can be contributing too if the environment enables them to be out there.
Just two very quick things. There is a webinar Labour Cycles are organising at 5 p.m. on Thursday. It's been quite well picked up on Twitter, but we've got 150 councillors from 50 towns and cities joining that, and we'll have 5 council leaders who've gone early with good stuff, talking about what they've done and why. So that's political motivation to do it. So if you have a councillor that you can nudge to it, although it's being organised by Labour Cycles, we've had Conservative and Lib Dem councillors asked to join, and as long as they're playing the game, and being respectful, that's absolutely fine. And then second point, there's a little campaign that we'll launch at the end of this week called Key Workers for Street Space, and it's very specifically a campaign for hospitals to reach out to local council leaders to say, we would like to see street space reallocated, be bold, act now, because this matters for key workers. So watch out for that. That'll happen in the next 7 days.